Hey Matt, welcome to the podcast. We're here really just to dive deep into your founder story, how you launched Pangea, what was the idea behind it. But for those who don't know more about you personally, what's your story and leading up until actually launching Pangea?
Yeah, awesome. Great to be here. So, I guess my background professionally for the last 10 years was at a big tech company. I did a lot of different roles over the 10 years. Ended up in sort of a product focused role on a new innovation project, which was sort of a community offering that we were sort of building internally, but also planning to launch externally as a new go-to-market initiative. So kind of thinking about community and people within a big organization with lots of parts. And so that was kind of my first introduction to consumer-ish facing software. Obviously, we were kind of could force users in the company to use it because we're certain draws, so a bit different. But I was working on that, and then was traveling a lot as well with my company to start. And then a lot for fun as well. So I did a big backpacking trip. I did a lot of corporate travel. I was going to India a couple times a year. I was going to London about once a month. When I was traveling, I kind of there were a lot of little problems that I faced, and ultimately a handful of those turned into the initial idea behind Pangea. Figured I could build products. I enjoyed to travel. Why not sort of start it on the side? So we started it as sort of a side project, and then that's evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years. So I'm excited to talk a bit about that.
That's pretty cool. So what was the big idea? What was sort of the pain point you were suffering from that thought, oh, actually, there is a gap here that you can help solve with Pangea?
Yeah, well, there were kind of a few, and they've all kind of made their way into the product at different times. So interestingly, I think the one that has become the core of Pangea is around seeing where your friends are going to be traveling and seeing who's traveling where and being able to coordinate travel plans. And that kind of came to me. I had just done I was consulting at the time, and I had a client in San Antonio. So I was going Monday to Thursday every week to San Antonio. And I had a few friends who were consulting as well. So we all could fly wherever we wanted on the weekends, so long as it was in budget. And I met a group of sort of consultants plus friends in a big ski house in Lake Tahoe. And, it was one of those things where everyone knew someone, but no one knew everyone. And everyone was traveling frequently. And it was one of those sort of realizations like, okay, there's a pretty cool community of people here. I got invited because I knew someone who knew someone in the group. Those were a bunch of people who I follow on Instagram, but realistically, I'm never going to see again. So I was like, wouldn't it be cool if all of us who are moving around all the time had a way to just keep track of where others would be? And then, over that year, as I was traveling a lot for work, I also had a moment in India. I was in the sort of hotel bar, and I bumped into a coworker from the US who was also in India. Had no idea he was going to be there. He had just arrived, and I was leaving the next day. And it was the hotel we would always stay at as a company. So it's not, for over the 10 or 12 times I'd been there, that actually happened a few times. But a similar moment, it was like if we both knew we needed to we were going to India different weeks, like 9 times out of 10, we were just doing a semi-annual visit to work with our teams. And wouldn't it be great if we had coordinated that? And then you have a group of people and a community of people, even within a company, who are in the same place at the same time. Because then you can enjoy the weekend together rather than doing it on your own. So that was sort of the second moment where I was like, all right, there's definitely something here. I sketched it out as sort of a web application, more like B2B focus. And that was 2017, 2018. And then for a bunch of reasons, I was like, well, I'm not ready to jump in and start my own thing. I don't have the skills to do this. So I sat on it for a couple of years. And then during COVID,
So,
I
so
was, yeah.
double click on that moment because there'll be so many people listening and so many people who would have had the experience where they have an idea. They're like, oh, I have this sort of pain, and I'm sure others have this pain. But you went actually as far as even in 2017 to sketch out, whether it was on Figma or even on paper, a web application version of this. Why did you decide, of all the ideas that you possibly had, or ideas or thoughts that went into your mind, why did you decide, oh, actually, this is one I want to start to put down on paper?
Well, not uncommon for me, just generally to I was working on a product and doing a lot of product design So I actually sketched it out. I was in a PowerPoint slide, so it's a very crude mock-up. But it was just thinking about like, all right, this problem around where, when, who, like where will people be at a certain time in the future? And I don't know. I guess that those like kind of levers and that concept just fascinated me. I don't know if you know like read Harry Potter when you were growing up. The Marauders
I
map
love
I
it.
was thought was fascinating, where you could just see where everyone was going to be.
Oh yeah,
Um,
with the footprints.
yeah. And then, Find My Friends and the Snap Map kind of came out around when I was thinking about sort of this thing of wouldn't it be cool if you could see where friends would be in the future? And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could get the same map view of your friends, but like you could see where people would be next month or whatever. So I think for me, it was just an idea that I wanted to conceptualize because it was complicated and interesting. Yeah. So, sketch something out and then ultimately like the original sketches are super different than what came to be. But
And then you fast forward a couple of years because you sat on it. Why did you sit on it?
I think a couple like one, I was really enjoying my like corporate role and job. Like we were building up a team, a new product. I was leading that, so we scaled our engineering team from like 5 people to 20. So I was learning a lot, and I was like, all right, I think I'm learning things that will make it more viable to do my own thing in the future. I always knew at some point, especially after I was in my old company. It was my first job out of college. So I was there 10 years in total, which is a bit atypical these days. But I always knew like when I was ready to leave, I would not go interview for other jobs. I would do something for myself. But ultimately, I thought I was learning more that would make it the likelihood of success down the line higher. And it's impossible to know if that was the right. Would you have been better off launching sooner? Would you have been better off like waiting and making sure you can actually execute pros and cons? But that was what kept me there. And then it was in COVID in 2020. I had a close friend who's actually one of our advisors now. He reached out because he was sort of sales background, and he was like, I have this idea for a travel app, and I don't know how to do product, and I don't travel as much as you, so I feel like I'm curious your view on this. And after we had a great call, and it was a more like group travel coordination and planning. But after the call, I was like, I also have a lot of ideas for a travel app, and I travel more than this person who's going in on it, and I have the background in product. Why am I not starting to try this on the side at least? And that was sort of my moment where I'm like, all right, like let's take those ideas from Pangea and let's figure out what that looks like. And we actually started on the consumer route because again, my head, it was like this B2B concept that could be useful for companies. Obviously, like, it's easier to test the thing out with friends. That was sort of the starting point. And then as we got traction, it sort of stayed consumer for that reason.
That's interesting. What was the B2B idea then?
Well, the B2B was the same idea as Pangea, but just everyone in a company could see where everyone else in the company was traveling. So like
Got
as
it.
a
Company
consultant
wise.
or as any company that had a lot of travel going on, which ours did, it would just be valuable to be able to coordinate. If you're going to go on the trip, you might as well coordinate and get the benefit of getting traveling with colleagues, because we all know it is a great way of building relationships and building community.
And then you're trying to build this on the side during your actual full-time career. What does the day in the life look like when you're sort of going 9 to 5 at a job? What are you doing in the evening? Like, how are you actually building this alongside a
Yeah.
career?
It's interesting. It started slow, a bunch of weekends learning Figma and building some mock-ups and thinking about like fully thinking through the future and the product and then what it looked like. I brought on a very talented engineer who I was formerly on my team at my old company, and he was doing it sort of part-time on the side as a freelancer as well. So it was moving quite slowly. It's not like we did a lot every week, but it'd be generally an early morning call with him because he was in India once a week, and then we generally connect in the weekend as well. And then a lot of like my weekend mornings, Figma and testing and things like that. But the beginning, it was really slow at the beginning, and I think with hindsight, I probably would have. Well, there's a lot of things in hindsight, but I think when it's slow, you don't focus on it enough. So you almost want it to. You don't need to jump in fully to make it like a bit more meaningful, but it was almost too slow for it to capture my full like attention and focus.
That's interesting. And you're going through the design process on Figma, teaching yourself these skills and working with the part-time developer from your company that you, I guess, colleagues at the same time.
Well, he had left, but yeah, former
He had
colleague, yeah.
left, former colleague by that point. And when you are designing this, is this something just a product of your mind, or are you sort of speaking to other travelers to think, oh, what would you like to see in this? Like, how does that ideation process go from idea to actually becoming something visual?
Yeah, so the beginning, well, the first version of it was I did a lot of research on what else was out there because with a lot of these ideas, you're like, this isn't rocket science. Like, why hasn't someone else done it? It's either like a bad idea or someone has done it and you just aren't aware of it. And so I downloaded pretty much every travel app like in existence at the time, and most of them sucked. There's like so many apps in travel, and I think many of them solve it's the classic I traveled, I had this pain, I think others have it too, I'm going to build an app around this one thing. I think the challenge there in travel is that it's so different every single time you do it. So if you think of like users and user personas, traveler is not like specific enough. And then I see a bunch of apps. It's like, what kind of traveler are you? Are you a solo traveler? Are you a group traveler? Do you travel with friends? But it's single select. And
Mm.
actually, as a traveler, I'm a solo traveler sometimes. I travel with my parents sometimes. I travel with groups of friends sometimes. And every single trip is, I'm a different persona of traveler. So my needs are different. And in general, that was one of the misses I saw in all these apps is they solved one need for one persona that might be useful on one type of trip that you do, but it wasn't generic enough to be useful the other 80% of the time I was traveling. As a result, so you might use it once and then you delete it and you see high churn. So that was a big part of how I did the research process, was like looking at what was out there. There's a lot of great information on like reviews of apps as well. Like, what are people asking for from other, and then yeah, like talking to my friends who traveled a lot, and I ran the idea by probably 20 colleagues and advisors and just smart people who traveled, to say, all right, I think there's something here, I want to go after it. What do you think? And that sort of validated that we were onto something.
And then take me back in time. Which year are we in now when you are designing on Figma, working with your former colleague?
Yeah, so this is like 2021. I was in an outsite in 2019 in Tulum. 2020, I guess it was 2020 in Tulum. And I had done the Figma mockup of like Pangea 1.0. And that was sort of two pieces. One was the where a friend's going to be in the future, and then the other one, which is actually what we launched our alpha version around, just the pin map concept. Because you had all these apps, and if you know the bin app, the big orange map where you can just track the countries you've been. It just like it's
Yeah, yeah, almost like a scratch card.
yeah, you just like there's a checklist of countries. They don't completely on your phone, like no server, all the data is local, super simple. They got like 5 million downloads. Like, it just became this de facto, like tracking app for countries you had been. And I had a few moments with friends where it's like, oh, we should plan a trip together. Like, where's everyone been? Like, let's pull out our maps and compare our phones. And it's like, okay, well, wouldn't it be cool if this was, well, there were a few things missing. And this is where I saw in the product reviews on the App Store, everyone's asking to be able to add cities to the map. So I was like, yeah, that would be interesting to be able to track all the cities and countries. And then I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could make that social? And, I could search any country or any city and see my friends who have been, because then I know who to ask for recommendations. And I think every time you remember your friend was, in Greece last summer, so you're going to ask them for recommendations, there's probably 10 other people who are also there, also have good tips. You don't know who to ask. So that was kind of the first feature set we built for the alpha. And then interestingly, as we launched that and as we got feedback on that, people were like, this is cool, but like, why would I open this app often? And that sort of drove us to think about I looked at that as almost like a record of where I had been. So if we could capture ahead of time, like where you were going, then once the trip ended, we could automatically add it to your profile. And so that was sort of the next phase. And then as that next phase came into the app, people were like, oh, this is really cool. And that's where we have focused much more since the beginning. Interesting how it
It's
evolved.
so fascinating to go back into your mind because the way you thought through that, and we speak to a lot of people building new products, you felt this general pain basically of where are my friends, where are the other travelers going to, and I can connect and meet again in the future. This sort of timeline effect, which is actually a really interesting way of characterizing it. And then further from that, you then download every app that there is on the store, more or less, right? And you just feel the experience and you feel like it's lacking. You feel like it's made from basically hobbyists to sort of one and done situations. But more than that, then you sort of studied them through the reviews from the customer standpoint. And then you're sort of assimilating all of this and understanding, okay, fine, this one did well. What did well about it? What did it get wrong? What did other things get wrong? And then putting that together in a learning. So, trying to prevent doing the same mistakes twice and learning from others. This is a really fantastic product ideation phase. Like it's probably drawn out over several months because you're still, working full time, but people could do this already with their own idea, right? Like, what are people doing already and what people don't like about it? I think a lot of people do the first part, not enough people do the second part. The analysis of sort of the customer experience and sort of crowdsource that through reviews. That's even if you're building a service business, you go on, look at other service businesses, you could set up a call with them, right? These enterprise sales, and just pretend you're a customer and see what that experience is like, and and have that experience as same as for a consumer product you download it, right? It's the same sort of deal. Okay, so now you're launching your alpha version, and it has these sort of first the record of where you're going, and then you could plan ahead, and then it would automatically update basically your profile, which is your history in terms of your travel history. And now you're moving forward to sort of collaboration, sharing, social part of it. What are the next steps now? Why did you decide to do more than the alpha? Was it because customers were saying, hey, look, I like this, I want to see more? You were seeing traction, you had belief, were you delusional? Why go beyond the alpha?
Yeah, so I think we launched the alpha we actually didn't even put it on the App Store. We did it through Expo. So it was like this really complicated process where people had to download Expo, click a link, and I got 100 friends to do it though. So we got 100 friends on the app, updated their profiles and built it out. And they're like, this is cool. And then that was, I think you can always have like abstract conversations about what people want in an app or like in something, but until you have it in front of you, and even designing in Figma, like until you, sometimes, at least for me, I don't know the right UX or the right like UI for something. And then, we've actually, we're working on a feature now where we built a very crude version of it using components we had, because I'm like, I need to play with this and see what like makes sense with real data. I think for a lot of people, once they had part of the concept in front of them and could play with it, it was a really good opportunity to get feedback from them on like, what did they like? What did they want in the product? But the danger there is that people want everything. And that was sort of, I think as a product manager, as a founder, you need to stay true to like the vision and the gap that you see in the market. And there's a bunch of features people are like, oh, it'd be cool if I could do this and this and this. I'm like, there's like apps that are very good at doing that and that and that. And we don't necessarily want to compete there yet. So I think, launching it, getting feedback on direction was helpful. And then ultimately it was just like the first version was ugly. If I could go back in time, I'd have hired a really awesome designer up front and spent a lot more on design before we started building as sort of a bootstrapped side project. I was like, oh, I could just do the design in Figma. The UX was good. The UI and the styling and all of that stuff is where I think we should have invested a bit more up front, because we ultimately spent 3 iterations of like UI refreshes in the app, so it was much more expensive in hindsight. But yeah, we once we validated the initial concept in an ugly way, we thought about, okay, this is a bit clunky, this is a bit ugly. Like, how is this going to become something that a non-friend will download from the App Store and be like, oh, this is cool, I'm going to tell friends about it. And I think it's almost a false flag sometimes when your friends are telling you it's a good idea, where it's amazing, because they're going to be nicer than if they're a random consumer and it's a random app. And I think one of the dangers in consumer in general for apps is, every time a friend tells you something's wrong with it, there's like 100 people who just deleted the app because they don't give a shit about you or the product. They just, if it's useful, they'll keep it. If not, they'll get rid of it. And there's 12 trillion apps out there. So, you need to, the bar for quality is quite high.
That's interesting when you spoke about sort of synthesizing all the feedback and sort of really being strong on the boundary of your zone of competence in the product and where you want to specialize and where you don't. And sort of having that clear distinction, feeling confident in your zone of confidence, saying, look, we're not going to build you an all-encompassing product. It's going to be a surgical tool that will be helpful for this particular use case, at least at the beginning, because those are the things that end up doing very well. They deliver a lot of value to a unique case in the plethora of life. And having that sort of definition, having focus basically is a key part to what you said. I also want to pick up on the idea of UI. That's something when we speak to a lot of people, we feel is too low in the priority ladder, because today in 2025, people are going to install your app, even if it's the first version, on their phone, and it's going, that icon square is going to be in between Instagram, WhatsApp, and TikTok, right? Like it's going to sit there. And so the customer bar experience is so high that when they click on it, they expect it to load like this. They expect
Mm-hmm.
it just to flow beautifully. They don't want to use this manual. No one ever wants to use this manual on how to use your app. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to be simple. Like not overbuilt, not over complex. And it sounds like you, in hindsight, for sure, are recognizing the power of good UI alongside UX, but UI, something beautiful, aesthetic, because that's the wrapper of your product, and you want that to be basically zero friction, right? You don't want to impede your customer at all to actually extracting value from your product. Then you mentioned around getting a non-friend to use it and really trying to hear the signal out of all the noise, where your friends are telling, "Hey, good job, massage the ego," and it's so easy just to listen to that, lean into that, and let them veer you down a path, or smell your own bullshit. And we don't want to do that either. And so the real test is the real market for those who don't have any invested interest in you. Do you remember the first time that when you looked at the, what was it, a Firebase console, whatever your database was, do you remember the first time you saw someone you didn't recognize and you were like, hey, how did they find us?
Yeah. Well, it was funny because when we launched on the App Store, we almost immediately, I don't want to falsely encourage people that you're going to get a million people to download your app. Once we launched it, we'd get one random download, three random downloads from random people. Most of them, though, I mean, you had a segment on this, like downloads don't mean anything. Most of them download the app, maybe registered, and then never use the app again for some reason, right? We got a lot of random ones, but yeah, I was in Johannesburg actually on my way into Cape Town the first year, just over 2 years ago, and I got an email from someone about the ideas he had for the app. Didn't know them. Looked at his profile. He had a handful of friends on the app. Didn't know any of them. So someone probably friend to friend to friend in the nomadic circle. It's a kind of small world, as you know. But that was pretty cool, and that was a pretty like early version of the live app. It was still pretty ugly, but like they could see the vision. You could tell it was a tech person, so he saw the vision. You saw the need it was solving, and it was very good faith feedback of like, yeah, I love what you're doing. Have you thought about these 20 things? Because it's like this is clunky and that's clunky. I think I was like, yeah, no, we have. There's a lot we want to do, and I think that's the other challenge that, especially early on, when you're thinking like MVP, like what's the functional MVP, and then on your UI UX point, what's the UX MVP like? Because you can build the product, but if you're like input form for a date picker sucks, you're not going to validate that the idea is good because people are just frustrated by entering data and they're not going to like play ball. So all of those little things need to work really well. And I think that's one thing actually in a lot of these travel apps, I think that I was downloading and experimenting with in ideating Pangea, a lot of them had really beautiful UI, but like the UX sucked. Like the form input box would get covered by the keyboard, stuff like that, where it's just like, this is painful because a good artist built a good style guide, but like the UX sucks. And I think we were on the other side. We had a pretty mediocre UI, but the UX was where we put a lot of our focus because we knew we wouldn't be able to validate the core MVP without the experience of adding your trip being pretty good.
That's pretty awesome. Now let's fast forward a bit to, okay, you feel like, okay, people are using this that you don't even know. There is market validation. You're iterating the product in your spare time. You've got a full-time career. And then at some point you start thinking, I've had my grad job since graduating, been there
Mm-hmm.
for a decade. And actually, I know I want to do something on my own after this job. And Pangea seems like the obvious answer. But when did that become obvious? When did that become real? When did it become, okay, I want to now leave my job for Pangea?
Yeah, I think there were kind of two things that happened within a few months of each other that were the two sides of that decision. One was we finished a massive rebuild of the product I was leading, and we launched that. That was the end of 2023, or I guess it was like the first week after Christmas in 2024. So I kind of knew that was probably the end of my chapter at that company, but I was too almost too attached to what we had built and the team and everything to jump out before. From a pure Pangea business opportunity, I probably should have, but I think I'm someone who likes to be part of the journey, and was too determined to see that succeed to give up on it at the end. So that was part of it. And then the other part was just, as we were seeing validation from users and seeing the user base increase, I was mindful of sort of the time constraint that I had. And I was being a pretty good product manager and designer. And we had one engineer working on it at that point full time. But I wasn't being a very good CEO as we were trying to think of the startup journey and how we wanted to fund it, like partnerships to help with distribution, things like that. We were really just building the product and building the product and building the product. And that's because that's one, what I was good at and what I enjoyed doing. So limited time, it's like my Saturday morning, I wanted to do the fun, let's build more features in Pangea, because it was sort of a passion project to start. And we weren't focusing on marketing. We weren't focusing on distribution. And ultimately, you can have the best product in the world, but if no one's using it, who cares? You built a cool thing, but you didn't actually, create you didn't create the outcomes you wanted for users, which is the ultimate goal, I think. So it was really those two realizations, the closure of that big chapter and launching the product I'd worked on for 4 years. And then the realization that if I wanted Pangea to reach its full potential, I needed to focus more on marketing, on fundraising, on partnerships, rather than just building a product in my spare time on the weekends.
Well, firstly, congratulations. I mean, that's a brave and courageous step, honestly. I think that many people wish and feel like they could do that. And it's, I guess, also recognizing the opportunity that you built for yourself, because this didn't come to you. You actually created it for yourself. And then, a lot of people, I think there's two schools of thought. I don't have enough time to work on an idea. And the other one is, I'm going to leave my job and then think of an idea. Well, actually, you could do both, because when you just sort of dissect your day, there are many hours we just watch Netflix or YouTube or whatever it could be. And, instead of consuming, why don't we create something and just put it out in the world and see what happens? It is just an adventure. It's not supposed to be easy. It is an adventure. And when you did leave, now you're sort of going all in, basically, onto Pangea. And that was from a sort of a visceral standpoint, why you felt, okay, this could be it, and I didn't want to leave immediately on my corporate job because I had a sort of a vested interest in delivery there. But from a statistical metric dashboard standpoint, what was your traction like? Did you feel like it had legs? What showed you it had legs? What was sort of retention like? What looked like inside of the product itself?
Yeah. So I think the metric that the couple metrics that gave me pretty good belief that we had something. We were seeing users refer other users, not in a massive we've got 1 million new users coming in, but we were seeing it. We were seeing the number of connections in the platform increasing quite a bit. So the number of users who had friends, which ultimately is the biggest predictor of success in Pangea, is do you have friends in the app? Because if you don't, you're not getting the value in the core value prop. So as those two were increasing, we were feeling optimistic. The other thing at the end of 2023 we launched for the first time was our Pangea Wrapped feature, which basically summarizes all of your travels for the year in a nice little infographic. I had made them for my own travels the 5 years prior. I just was fascinated by, travel's intangible. You create these memories, and it's cool to make it tangible somehow. I think a lot of travelers most of my friends who are traveling track the countries or whatever in a notes app or something. So we built that, and we saw massive growth around that feature, where people would literally download the app, add all their trips for the last year just to get that little infographic. And it was pretty clunky the first time we launched it. So we're like, all right, there's definitely something here. We're getting referrals. The last thing that was less of a dashboard metric, but as we were trying to figure out our fundraising journey and how to do it, one of my oldest advisors and the CFO actually of my former company had suggested doing a sort of friends and family round as our pre-seed. So we started, went down that process. We didn't need a lot to keep it going, but especially as I was self-funding it at the beginning, that became an important thing. When you lose your salary and your full-time job, you need to be able to fund the business, especially at the beginning. So I had mentioned that to someone I had met traveling a couple weeks after we had met. And then after I had left, this was in Cape Town, after I had left, I'm getting hounded by the guy of how do I invest? How do I invest? How do I invest? So a user there's 3 or 4 people who ended up joining our friends and family round who within a few weeks of me meeting them and them getting to know me and also seeing the app were just like approaching me. I didn't even mention that we were doing it in a few cases, like, hey, are you guys taking investment? And that was a really clear signal, because these were people who were power users of the app, who were living the lifestyle and saw like, yes, this need is real. And I'm not only going to download the app and add connections and like boost your dashboard metrics. Like, I want to throw real cash behind this because I want to be part of the journey and I want to support it.
That's incredible. When you were deciding to raise friends and family around, now you've stopped your income source from your job and you'd invested some up until on your own investment. I think that's important as well. It puts your own skin in the game, right? You know, you put your money where your mouth is, and that got you to this far, and you got as far as you possibly could on your own. And I think that's a sentiment that is really undervalued. I think a lot of people will have an idea and think, how do I get fundraising to get started? But actually, no, like you need your first customer to get started and make your first dollar from a customer, not from the investor. It's often what we say, because that proof of traction speaks volumes, and let the market decide whether your idea has legs. And then you're going forwards. And the best thing often an investor will ask you, and I'm sure you've had this experience, is how much have you invested yourself into this idea? Time, sweat, and money. And, you know, if no one wants to invest in a founder who doesn't have skin in the game. So that's pretty cool that you did that and went on that journey. Up until today, you've only raised external funding from one friends and family round, or have you now raised again?
We did, technically it was one round. We did a small amount, and then 6 months later did about double that amount. So yeah, just the friends and family. And as you said, I think one of the things that was helpful for people believed in the idea, believed in the product, but also saw, look, like this isn't some idea that you're going to get bored of in a month. Like, I had been working on it for 2 years on my nights and weekends. I had put in, about a third of the total funding is from me, like in total. So no one's in for more than I am. And I think that's important. And then the last piece, like I follow a lot of like startup founders, and there's different mentality, but it's like you see these founders who like the first thing they do is hire themselves. And like, I haven't hired myself yet. It's where the money is going towards external costs, to continuing to build the app, to continuing to market the app. And if we do a bigger round, a venture round, then obviously I'll be one of the hires. Or as we bootstrap up revenue, then that becomes sort of the end goal. And ultimately, it's your company, you own a good chunk of it. And that's the good part, but also the risky part as a founder. And I think it makes it much more palatable for someone, to be like, yeah, I'll throw $5,000 or $10,000 behind this, because like you're in for way more than that, and you're all in on it and you're working on it. And it's not like I'm just paying you to work on a hobby project. So I think that's an important part of at least for me, of getting funding, is, people saw no one's in it for more than I am. So they're sort of just
You're a really unique situation. And I mean, the fact that it came from sort of people who actually found value in the product and wanted to invest in your journey. I mean, there is literally no better recipe for an investor around than that, right? As opposed to trying to sell to someone who's not even a user. Right. Conceptually, what is this going on, and trying to be on the hard sell when actually the product is selling itself. I mean, that speaks volumes. And a lot of times when we speak to people who are going fundraising, they don't know how much to raise. So how did you decide how much to raise? How much did you raise? And was it sort of determinant on a runway, or how much you could actually just raise from people you knew?
Yeah, kind of both. I think it's funny because you're always told you should know exactly how much you want to raise. And I think the counter to that is like, if with different budget and runway, you can come up with 10 different strategies. So, chicken, egg. For us, we wanted to, one of the things I realized as we were building on the side and moving pretty slowly is a lot of the ideas that I was super confident in and that even had market or user validation were bad ideas. And I think if you raise too much too quickly, it becomes really easy to spend it quickly. So we never, we tried to raise kind of as little as we could up front. There's, in terms of getting like brand presence and marketing reach and things, there's certainly, a strategy that might be valuable to follow that involves a much larger amount of money, because then you have much more firepower to dedicate towards that. But also you don't want to like do that too early, because you market a product that doesn't have perfect like product market fit, where your funnel's leaky, where you're onboarding isn't perfect, you're gonna waste it ultimately. And I think we've been able to iterate a lot of those things and learn a lot of those lessons as we've watched people use the app and as the app has evolved. And we've done it in a way that isn't truly sustainable. Like, we're not generating revenue yet, so we still are reliant on investment, but our burn rate's pretty low, and we can kind of sustain at this rate for quite a while until we feel that we've got the perfect recipe. I think we're pretty close to that. I think the app is, it's come light years from where it started. So I think at some point you want to press the gas, but if you're a half a degree off on your trajectory from Earth to Mars, you end up in deep space. So you want to make sure you're on the right trajectory before you light up the rocket.
I do love the analogy. I think it's a great forcing function for creativity as well, frugality, because over raising, yeah, you're right. You can just be a shotgun spray approach and see what sticks, and you end up being very inefficient. And as a company, which is a startup, you want to be as lean and as sort of effective as possible with as little as possible. And it actually is a forcing function for creativity and really thoughtfulness around the product and doing what you can, as much as you can with what you have. So I really like that mindset around it. We have seen a lot of people we've worked with raise a significant amount and sort of expect the capital to do the work, where in reality it's not going to create the fire, it's fuel for your fire, which you've created.
Absolutely.
So I love the thinking around that. Let's get a little bit tactical as we sort of wrap up. Is now that you're full-time, you've got runway, you haven't commercialized the product just yet. So you have probably a different motivation right now, which is not revenue, but some KPI, your North Star metric, which sounds like, and you can correct me if you're wrong, is the number of connections in the product, because the network effect is your defensible moat, which is a genius part to bake inside of the product. Talk to me about how you are thinking about driving your North Star metric, and how do you choose your North Star metric?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's especially as we iterated the product, there's a few use cases where people use the app. So we've got this weird cohort of people who have no friends, but like add tons of cities and recommendations. It's like 5% of our active users or something. So it's interesting. It's not our focus area. But as we built and iterated, I think the few metrics we look at, one is sort of active users, right? Like if someone downloads, doesn't activate, it doesn't mean anything. So our monthly active user is sort of our main one we look at, and getting that up. But the other thing, especially as we were learning and trying to get outside of just like the friend group using it, we also just looked at net new users each month, because if we weren't getting new people in, we weren't learning what was wrong. So we kind of just, in the fall, we're really focused on experimenting with marketing to just try to get as many new users into the platform as possible, and then see which ones activated, which ones dropped off, and try to continuously improve that so we could get more of them to convert into monthly active users. And then the biggest predictor of if someone was going to come back and retain on the app is if they had friends and had connections. So we wanted to make that process easy for them to find people they knew in the app, and also for them to invite other people onto the app. So referral is I guess like a second derivative metric that we look at. The most excited and engaged users are not only connecting with their friends, but they're also referring and bringing new friends onto the platform. There's a lot of ideas we have to get those, to continue to get those up, just from little tweaks in the product, forcing functions at different points during onboarding. So there's a lot of experimentation that we have done and we continue to plan to do. The other one that's super interesting and less typical, but in travel I think is valid, is I look at something called quarterly active user, because we have a good cohort. And obviously over time we want to improve engagement, get people using the app consistently, like, ideally weekly, even while they're traveling, not just once a month. But we see a lot of people who use the app and then they stop using the app for 4 months because they're at home not traveling, and that they use it again a few months later. And I think while we obviously want to move towards more consistent usage, it's showing that those users are getting value on a long-term basis and are being retained. And I think it's your point on the moat and the connections. Once you have a bunch of friends in this platform, in this app, you're incentivized to be like, oh, cool, I planned another trip. Let me broadcast out to my network where I'm going. Because maybe someone has a recommendation, maybe someone will be there, maybe someone wants to tag along. And that notification becomes a really powerful like reactivation for people across their different like travel journey.
Knowing where to segment the periods on your metrics is actually really important because, so for WhatsApp, a daily active user is actually a very good metric, right? Because it's a daily habit. But for Uber, it's not. Actually, weekly active users is their main key metric. And for Airbnb, it's monthly. It's not daily. They're not looking at daily users. So yeah, it's really dependent on your market, your demographic, and your archetype of user. And so I can actually resonate that myself. Like quarterly makes a lot more, feels like a real valid way. Obviously, you would have more insight in terms of the data, but just intuitively speaking, quarterly makes sense. So your main user acquisition channel right now, is it, now that you've experimented with paid marketing, is it paid marketing or is it network effect referrals?
Network effect, word of mouth is the biggest one. And the other one that we've seen really good sort of results with are just partnerships in general. Really onboarding any group of people who know each other. Like we saw this with Remote Year at the end of a program. People hadn't heard of Pangea, and it wasn't always me. It would be a friend who was a power user on the app that would say, hey, follow me on Pangea at the end of the month. Those 20 people who all knew each other would onboard, and all 20 of them immediately had 20 friends. And our biggest challenge with paid marketing has been it's really hard to achieve that because you might see it and be like, this is cool. You onboard, you have 0 friends. And the likelihood that you're going to bring friends onto it and be like, oh, this concept is, it just like, it doesn't convert. So in general, paid didn't work super well. We did a giveaway of a flight though, and you had to refer to people in the app. That was kind of interesting because from like a marketing spend per result perspective, you got a lot of users, but then a lot of those users activated because they were forced to bring friends on in order to enter the flight giveaway. We obviously had to give away a flight, but I'd rather do that to users than spend the same amount of money
On
on
Instagram ads,
right? Yeah,
there are when we see products with a strong network effect as a mode. We're a big believer in viral referral mechanisms. So something like, you haven't monetized the app yet. So a lot of people, what we see is introduced proxy paywalls in terms of referrals. And when I say that, I mean, for layman's speak, if you had a dating app, for example, and you hadn't monetized it, after the 10th swipe, you could say, okay, if you want to unlock more swipes today, refer this to 2 people. And you actually get power users who are referring people they know. And also that's a great sort of growth mechanism, which costs nothing. And secondly, it tells you where to charge. Because right now, it's not immediately obvious where you monetize or where people are extracting the most value. But if people are willing to incur friction, and they're not investing capital in terms of a paywall monetarily, they're investing their reputation by referring and their time because they have to send a link. And that's really your job to make that as seamless as possible. But their reputation is really what they're paying with. And if you're seeing that, people are willing to actually do it at this point or this point, you do ABCD test it, it's a really powerful method. And the second thing I've seen work well on paid media, which is maybe helpful for you, I don't know the tool and I haven't done it personally, but I remember speaking with a colleague about this, is there is a marketing tool in which you can, on Instagram at least, market to people, friends of followers. So people who follow Pangea probably are a Pangea. And you can market paid ads to the followers of those people. So as opposed to just a random guy in the middle of Alabama. So that could be something interesting to look forward to.
That is interesting.
Yeah, so check that out. The last thing we'll finish off with is the future. What are your current monetization plans and where do you see the product going, say, in the next 12 months?
Yeah, great question. So I think I'll start with where the product goes. Some of that is around some of the monetization engines we have. So in general, I think right now it does a really good job of connecting people who already know each other and helping them keep track of travel plans. I think one of the things we're seeing in the broader travel space, and as people are traveling, like you also want to meet new people who are similar to you. And that's where programs like Remote Year and others did a really good job, is you would do one of these programs, you'd pay a premium to do it, and you would meet a bunch of people. And I think building community is not it's difficult, but that's one of the areas where we want the app to continue to focus and help facilitate in different places, the way to help people connect with people that they might not necessarily know yet. And there's a lot of I think apps that do that, or it's like the swipey dating app type method. I think what actually works, the way you meet make friends is by doing cool stuff with those people. So we want to help enable users to do cool stuff with other users while they're traveling in different cities. And that's one of the main monetization strategies we have planned, is being able to sort of get commission on some of those experiences that people might be booking on Viator or Get Your Guide. Helping them do those experiences with other users from the app at the same time, and monetizing in a way that doesn't cost the user anything. Because in general, I think with consumer apps, I see a lot of them charge for features. Ultimately, our goal is to get as many users using the app as possible. So we want to reduce the friction by charging them directly, by not charging them directly, and find ways that are additive to the user experience that also generate revenue, because ultimately we need revenue in order to sustain. So yeah, that's kind of the broad direction. And then the other one is continuing to lean into that referral engine and trying to get people to bring friends on and just develop features that make it natural to invite friends to the app. So making it easy to share data from the app with non-users, making it easy for non-users to consume information without necessarily downloading the app, and then using those as sort of hooks to get them to hopefully convert into users themselves. But I think hey, download this app. People have a lot of apps and are hesitant to download another one. So we want to make it like super value add for new users. And we've got a couple features dropping in the next few weeks that should help the journey.
This has been such a fascinating episode. I mean, I've known you for over a year now and been watching you build this from the sidelines. And it's actually now to actually get inside of your mind as a true product. That's what you are, I believe. You're actually a real product person. The entire conversation from anyone who is listening is you're so customer focused. You're so from the user experience focused. What is that? And you just said people don't want to download a million things. They don't want that. They just want value. It's a very sort of humility sort of oriented way of thinking, and I think it's really amazing, the product that you built and you're continuing to go all in on. So yeah, I wish you the best of luck for the future of that. That's the pod. Thanks so much.